NASCAR. When you think of NASCAR, a lot of people think NASCAR is the most American racing series ever. Granted, NASCAR started off in the South, but they expanded all over the United States as decades came by, and even outside of America. We'd even had non-American drivers not only race in NASCAR, but even win in NASCAR. When it comes to Canadian NASCAR drivers in the top 3 NASCAR series, 5 Canadian drivers would win a total of 13 races by the time this episode is being made. One of them is the story of today's episode. On the 73rd episode of Ian's Racing Stories, I will be telling a story about Earl Ross, a driver in Canada who not only accomplished his dream of racing in NASCAR, but also making history in the NASCAR Winston Cup Series. I will be going over his early years, his NASCAR career, and what he's done after NASCAR. With that being said, let's begin. Earl Ross was born on September 4th, 1941 from Fortune Prince Edward Island, Canada. Before I begin with the rest of this episode, I tried to find information about his early life and more information about his early racing career, but I could not. However, if y'all know more, feel free in the comments below. With that being said, let's continue. Earl Ross would start his racing career in the early 1960s by driving hobby cars. After racing in hobby cars, he would start racing in late models. In 1970, Earl Ross would win 9 out of 10 international stock car races in Ontario, Canada. In 1971, Earl Ross would attend his first Daytona 500 as a spectator. 2 years later, Earl Ross would get into major stock car American racing in 1973, making his debut in ARCA at Daytona with Carling, a Canadian beer company, sponsoring him for not only the race, but his entire career in major stock car American racing. Earl Ross would start in 11th, but would finish in 13th, 19 laps down. After finishing 14th in the second Daytona 500 qualifying race, Earl Ross would make his NASCAR Winston Cup Series debut in the 1973 Daytona 500 in the number 52 1973 Chevrolet for Alan Brook and Red Vap Ale, Carling, as a sponsor. Earl Ross would start in 30th for the Great American Race, but he would have engine issues and would drop out of the race after running 30 laps. Earl Ross would make a return to the Winston Cup Series at Talladega for the Winston 500, starting 46 in the 60-car field. Earl Ross would avoid a huge crash which took place early in the race, but would suffer some ignition issues and would retire from the race after running 167 laps, finishing 14th. Earl Ross would return once again in the car at Michigan for the Motor State 400. He was starting 12th but with DNF after running 134 laps due to rear end issues. After Michigan, Earl Ross and Alan Brooks' team would not return to the race for the rest of the 1973 NASCAR Winston Cup Series season, returning in 1974. In 1974, Earl Ross would continue to race for Alan Brook and Carling would return as a sponsor. Earl would finish in 10th in his second qualifying race, which meant that he'd start 22nd. He'd have a much better Daytona 500. I mean the Daytona 450. Check out the 40th episode of Racing Stories about the 1974 Daytona 450. Link in the description below. Earl Ross would finish 11th in that race, 3 laps down. Earl Ross would score 2 top 15s with a 13th place finish in the Atlanta 500 and a 12th in the Rebel 450 at Darlington. In the Winston 500 at Talladega, he would start in 12th in a 50-car race, but he would be the 50th place finisher, last, after running for 28 laps due to engine issues. Despite a bad finish at Talladega, he would score 2 top 5s at the World 600 with a 5th place finish, 8 laps down, and a second in the Motor State 360 at Michigan. After Michigan, Earl Ross would leave Alan Brooks' race team to join Junior Johnson Associates full-time for the rest of the season. Throughout his time racing for Junior Johnson, it was a mixed bag. He would have 3 top 5s and 8 top 10s. In other races, he would have some top 15s and top 20 finishes. In the worst finish of 22nd at the 1974 Southern 500 due to engine issues after running 146 laps. He'd have 5 DNFs, 3 of them due to mechanical related issues such as water pump issues for the Dixie 500. I mentioned engine issues at the Southern 500 in Darlington. And a transmission issue at Richmond for the Capital City 500. He would crash twice at Bristol for the Volunteer 500 and at Charlotte for the National 500. Despite a mixed bag result, he would have a major highlight not only in Earl Ross's career, but in NASCAR history. The 1974 Old Dominion 500 at Martinsville Speedway was the 27th race of the 1974 NASCAR Winston Cup Series season, which took place on September 29th, 1974. Richard Petty was the pole sitter for the race, and Earl Ross was starting 11th for the race. Before I continue, there is literally no broadcast from the race, only a few pictures. So I tried what I can to find on what happened in this race, specifically for Earl. Bear with me. From what I can tell, Earl Ross had a good race. On lap 421, Cale Yarborough, who was dominating the race, suffered an engine failure. 1 lap later, Earl Ross, a teammate to Cale, would take the lead while Cale went behind a wall. While Earl Ross took the lead and Cale DNF'd, Lenny Pond would bring out the 10th and final caution of the race. Earl Ross would lead the field back underway on lap 428. Not only did Earl Ross run away with it, not only did he dominate the final 72 laps of the race, but he would also lap the entire field. Earl Ross would become the first Canadian in NASCAR history to win a NASCAR race at Martinsville. Not only Earl Ross made NASCAR history, but the win would help him win the 1974 NASCAR Winter Cup Series Rookie of the Year. Despite his ups and downs, in 1974, Earl Ross' stats are 1 win, 5 top 5s, 10 top 10s, and average finish of 12.4, finishing 8th in points. After 1974, Earl Ross would not return to Junior Johnson Associates, and Carlin did not return as a sponsor. He would run 2 more races. A 13th place finish to the 1975 World 600 in the number 93 Ford for Don Levy Racing, owned by Junior Don Levy with Trucksmore Industry as the sponsors, finishing 13 20 laps down, and his final NASCAR race would be in the 1976 Daytona 500. He would return to the race with the familiar number 52, racing for DeWitt Racing, owned by LG DeWitt, in a Chevy with Coca-Cola as a sponsor. He would start in 12th, after finishing 6th in the second Daytona 500 qualifying race. Despite a good qualifying race and a pretty good starting spot, his race would go up in smoke with engine issues and would DNF after 28 laps, finishing 39th. He would attempt to race his way into the 1978 Daytona 500 in number 91 Valvoline of Canada Chevy for H. Miller Racing, owned by Harold Miller, finishing 24th, failing to qualify for the Great American Race of 1978, thus ending his NASCAR career. In 26 starts, he would have 1 win, 5 top 5s, 10 top 10s, only in 1974 with the Rookie of the Year awards, and his average finish throughout his entire season was a 15.3. After his NASCAR career ended, after running the 1976 Motorsport race in Trans Am in his home race, and after running 2 more ARCA races between 1974 and 1978 at Daytona, Earl Ross would return home to Canada to race once more. Heck, he even raced in the ASA National Tour Series in 1983 at Jukasa Motor Speedway, finishing 27th after suffering some ignition issues after racing for 74 laps. After having some one-off races in various series I can find on the third wheel, he would race in the NASCAR Eastern Series for 25 races between 1994 to 1998, running a full 9-race season in 1994, only scoring 2 top 5s and 5 top 10s, and running 1 NASCAR Super Series race in 1998. He would also do some Friday night races at Delaware Speedway until his retirement. Since his retirement, he would earn some awards from his accomplishments during his racing days. He would be inducted into the Canadian Motorsports Hall of Fame in 2000, the PEI Sports Hall of Fame in 2008, the Maritime Motorsports Hall of Fame in 2011, the Flamborough Stadium in the London Sports Hall of Fame, and the Yesterday Speedway Hall of Fame in 2021. Unfortunately, in his later years, Earl Ross would suffer from Parkinson's disease, sadly losing his life on September 18, 2014 at the age of 73. Earl Ross was quite a race car driver when he was racing in Canada. In NASCAR, Earl Ross showed that he can perform and race well when races go well. Unfortunately, his time in the United States was a short one because he never had long-term support to keep racing in America. After 1974, the opportunities racing in the United States was lagging, and he took what he took. After his opportunities to race in America ran out, he continued to race back home in Canada for the rest of his racing career. Earl Ross scored over 100 wins at the short tracks in the Midwest and Canada and scoring 7 awards. But his 1 win in the fall of 1974 at Martinsville Speedway will always be a historical first in NASCAR, making an impact for Canadian drivers racing in the United States of America. And one more thing before I end this episode. There is an Earl Ross song called Earl's Races On, written by Lucky Haskins and the Pit Stops. The song will be in the link in the description. Give it a listen. It does sound catchy. That is going to do it for another episode of Ian's Racing Stories. I want to say thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Ian, and I talk about racing and tell stories about the world of racing. And I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye, everybody.